Welcome back to the mystery, where the past never stays buried. Tonight, we open the gates to a place where humanity itself became the spectacle. They called them exhibitions. Displays of progress, of empire, of discovery. But what they really showed was something far darker. Imagine a crowd gathering, not to watch performers or animals, but to stare at people taken from distant lands, people whose lives were treated as curiosities. They were called exhibits, their homes reduced to cages, their voices silenced in the name of entertainment. Viewer discretion is advised. I first encountered the story of Oda Benga in a collection of fading photographs, his eyes staring out of a cage in the Bronx Zoo, 1906. He was a man from the Congo, brought to New York under the guise of education, a demonstration of the so-called savagery of foreign peoples. Crowds gathered. Children laughed. Adults whispered and pointed. Clergy protested. But curiosity won over compassion, and for weeks, a man was displayed as if he were an animal. Oda Benga's story was not unique. In the 19th century, Europe and America embraced what were called ethnological exhibitions. Paris, 1877, a Negro village was constructed for the World's Fair. Africans were housed in mock villages, their daily activities orchestrated for the amusement of thousands of visitors. Photographers captured their images, postcards were sold, and newspapers praised the scientific value of the display. Science, education, progress, all masks to disguise cruelty. Then there was Saartjie Baartman, the Hottentot Venus, whose life began in the Cape Colony and ended in London. She was displayed across Europe, her body dissected after death for scientific curiosity. Even in death, her humanity was denied. And yet, these exhibitions were celebrated by crowds, heralded by the elite, and framed as cultural enlightenment. But before we continue, please don't forget to subscribe, comment to hit that like button. I cannot describe to you the weight of reading these histories, of understanding that entire communities were stripped of dignity for the sake of spectacle. Yet, when I looked deeper, I realized the horror was not only in the cages or the fairs, but in the spectators themselves. Those who laughed, those who pointed, those who called it science, they were complicit. Their gaze turned curiosity into cruelty. Across London, Berlin, and St. Louis, similar displays unfolded. Indigenous peoples, Africans, and Asians were brought from distant lands under promises of opportunity, only to find themselves on display for the amusement of strangers. I imagined the long nights in makeshift quarters, the isolation, the fear. I imagined the eyes of children who grew up seeing their parents mocked in cages, the whispers of elders who knew their lives had been reduced to an exhibit. But the story did not end with the exhibitions themselves. The psychological scars endured. Oda Benga, after years of being a spectacle, struggled to find belonging and eventually took his own life. Saartjie Baartman's body remained in a museum until repatriated decades later, a reminder that history has a long memory and that our injustices are never truly buried. What struck me most as I researched was the subtle echoes of these events in modern times. Today, we no longer put people behind bars for curiosity, but we do construct new forms of observation: social media, reality television, poverty tourism. We stare, we judge, we consume lives as entertainment, all under the guise of engagement or education. The cages are gone, yet the instinct to objectify remains. And then there are the images that linger, the photographs of Oda Benga's barred figure, the postcards of smiling crowds in Paris, the headlines describing the scientific marvels in St. Louis. They haunt me, because they remind me that the human gaze can be as destructive as any chains or walls. I wanted to know what drove people to participate, to applaud, to perpetuate this cruelty. Was it ignorance? Was it the thrill of seeing something forbidden? Or was it, more frighteningly, the ease with which society can normalize inhumanity when framed as progress? As I pieced these histories together, I realized the horror was layered. There was the horror of the act itself, of people being forced into cages, humiliated, stripped of dignity. There was the horror of the spectators, of crowds cheering what should have been condemned. And there was the horror of memory, how easily society forgets, and yet, how those forgotten ghosts continue to speak if you choose to listen. I imagined walking through a museum exhibit devoted to these histories. The floors creak beneath my feet. The walls are lined with photographs and artifacts. The air smells faintly of dust and old wood. Shadows stretch unnaturally as if the figures themselves were still present, still watching. And I felt it, a cold, lingering awareness that the past is not past, that our capacity for cruelty is woven into the very fabric of civilization. Even today, descendants of those displayed, of those exploited, carry invisible scars. Entire communities were objectified, studied, and dehumanized. Their stories were rarely told, their voices silenced, except in whispers in archives, in fading photographs, in letters that survived against all odds. And yet, amid the horror, there is also a lesson, a warning, if you choose to heed it. To stare without empathy, to participate without conscience, is to rebuild the cages in whatever form they take. We may not see bars today, but the act of objectification, the enjoyment of spectacle at another's expense, persists. It is subtle, it is insidious, and it is dangerously human. As I close this chapter of history, I can't help but reflect, the human zoo was not merely an artifact of the past. It is a mirror held up to us, asking the uncomfortable question, how do we see others? How do we treat the unfamiliar, the different, the marginalized? And how easily can we justify cruelty under the veil of curiosity, science, or progress? When we stare, are we witnessing history, or are we complicit in it? The cages have been removed. The fairs have ended. The exhibits are gone. Yet the echoes remain. And if you listen closely, you might hear them still, the whispers of humanity forgotten, the silent calls of dignity denied, the shadows of lives reduced to spectacle. Remember this, cruelty does not need chains. It only needs eyes willing to look and hearts unwilling to care. And so, I leave you with this reflection, history is never just a record of what happened. It is a warning. It is a mirror. It is the echo of every time we chose curiosity over compassion, spectacle over empathy, and convenience over humanity. We are all spectators, every day. And every time we look without seeing, we rebuild a cage. This has been The Mystery, and I hope you enjoyed this video. Let me know what other concept or ideology you want me to cover. But until next time.